Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. It is my pleasure and my privilege to be leading this very important discussion that we're going to have. Our point of departure for this conversation is how do we strengthen Pakistan's financial resilience to climate-induced disasters? As the floods of 2010 and consequently the floods of 2022 have painfully, acutely demonstrated, risk transfer instruments such as climate risk insurance, contingency funds, contingency credit remain underutilized within the menu and tools that Pakistan has at its disposal currently. The purpose of this panel discussion is especially to hone in on these areas where we can close the gaps. And the stellar panel is going to talk about how disaster risk finance can be integrated into social protection systems to protect vulnerable communities against climate change. I would like to ask you to extend a very warm welcome to the panelists this morning. May I please ask Ali Tokir Sheikh, who is the member of Board of Directors, Loss and Damage Fund, the Fund for Responding to Loss and Damage, as the official name is. Mr. Sheikh is an esteemed climate finance expert from Pakistan, currently serving on the international board of the Fund for Responding to Loss and Damage. He's the principal author of Pakistan's National Climate Finance Strategy, which was launched at COP29 in Baku, and has led the Prime Minister's task force in formulating Pakistan's policy guidelines on carbon markets. Previously, Mr. Sheikh advised the Planning Commission on climate change and has also been the principal author of Pakistan's nationally determined contributions in 2021. Mr. Sheikh, can I please ask you to take the stage? Next, I have Dr. Kamal Ahmed, Advisor Climate and Disaster Risk Finance to the National Disaster Management Authority, Pakistan. Kamal is a globally recognized expert in risk finance, disaster risk management, and sustainable development. He has glowing academic accolades. I'm not going to read the full list, Kamal, but suffice it to say that he's more than qualified to speak on topics relating to advancing sustainable economic systems. Kamal's work integrates strategic policy development, risk finance, and capacity building initiatives to address the pressing challenges of climate change and disaster risk. Kamal. My dear friend and colleague, Sana Ehsan, is the Financing for Development Analyst, as well as the National Project Coordinator for the UNDP. Sana is a seasoned public policy expert who is currently coordinating the disaster risk finance and insurance portfolio, including the Global Shield, which you will learn more about during the course of this session at the UNDP. Sana brings significant experience in public policy, tackling diverse issues, and it is our pleasure to have her with us today. Sana. We have Mr. Mansoor Ali Masood, Senior Project Manager of the BRACE project at the Asian Development Bank. Mansoor is playing a pivotal role in shaping the social sector landscape in this country. His responsibilities encompass the administration as well as the management of loans, grants, and technical assistance aimed at enhancing health and social protection systems. Welcome, Mansoor. Joining us online, we have Hermione Soku, Policy Officer, Social Inclusion and Protection, Health and Demography Unit at the Directorate General for International Partnerships at the European Commission. Hermione is working on social protection. Before that, she worked for 14 years at the United Nations for ESCWA in Beirut and for ESCAP in Bangkok. Managing research and projects on social protection, inequality reduction, water, and sanitation. She has also worked in the private sector for BP, armed with an MA in economics and an MA in law and diplomacy from Tufts University. We look forward very much to hearing Hermione's input. With that, everyone is seated comfortably, which means that we can kick off. Ali, I would like to invite you to please give us a presentation, an overview of the Fund for Responding to Loss and Damage, tracing also the role of climate risk transfer instruments in managing climate vulnerability. Thank you.
Thank you, Sobia. Thank you for your very kind introduction. I'm truly honored to be here. Thank you for providing me this opportunity to share some of my reflections on the topic at hand. A difficult one, but fortunately we had a very rich day yesterday. I thought it was a safari in learning, at least for me. And my own reflection about yesterday, on which I'll build my today's presentation, was that there were 3 conversations happening in this room, almost concurrently. One dealt with social protection, that is reaching out to the bottom of the pyramid and supporting them mostly with cash disbursements, but there are other interventions as well. And BISP has excelled in this, particularly owing to its database. And the system is robust, it has been tested and implemented several times over. Second, and a relatively new role for BISP has been to work as a post office to disperse funds to the victims of various climate-triggered disasters as and when advised by the government. And on that work, which personally I think has been a deviation from BISP's main mandate, but BISP has done a good job moving very promptly and repeatedly, and that's a role that with time may be increasing. And third, concurrent conversation, at least as an undercurrent, and today we'll be talking about it more specifically, dealt with the phase 3 of more future-oriented, how best we can have adaptive social protection, which builds upon the first 2, but there may be many points of departure. So in my presentation, which I hope is on by now, I'll try to probe the territories of each one of them to see where they coincide with each other and where the points of departure are. And I'll do that in the context of Loss and Damage Fund. And I'm saying Loss and Damage Fund because the fund for responding to loss and damage is still a tongue twister for me, even after 5 board meetings. Just one more thing. These are my personal views. This is not the Loss and Damage Board's view, and nor are of any other institution that I may be working on. And most of it is very analytical or speculative. It's my thinking, and I could be, as many times earlier in my life, I could be wrong. And I'll share 6 slides with you, starting with this one. Each one has the same format. The first column presents instruments. The second one is its relevance for Pakistan or Pakistani context. And the third one, if I could think of, a possible case study or a best practice. And best practice is a misnomer. It may not necessarily mean the most appropriate option for Pakistan. It's just that to give you a sample, what else is happening in the world. So all 6 slides follow the same pattern. And depending on your preference, you can, because if yesterday was a safari, this will be a very quick roller coaster in next 5-7 minutes. I need to wrap up, so I won't be spending a lot of time. In the first column, you see instruments. Almost all of these instruments, given Pakistan's acute vulnerability and the thresholds that we have set in 2010 and 2020 or 2022, we are basically eligible to pursue any of these instruments. And a similar case in the Caribbean, disbursement time is 14 days, Yesterday, the World Bank's presentation said Pakistan is 10 days, but 10 days of cash disbursement. There is a difference between cash disbursement in 10 days and providing liquidity within 14 days based on insurance. So that's very impressive speed. And then in terms of understanding the instruments, as I said, there are 3 parallel conversations. This is the one that's before something happens. And it has several advantages and several limitations in the present systems, present thinking, present legislative frameworks, and institutional mandates. So it will be a leap forward if Pakistan thinks about this. And there are many opportunities available to Pakistan. And for BISP, I want to point out, institutions grow old, and if they don't grow, they start going down. We have seen that in this country several times. I don't want to give you examples of PIE or others, but sometimes I fear that BISP may be at a time when it'll start losing its brightest minds, global attention. It may get more financing, though in percentage terms, but given the challenge and new roles, and therefore this is time to reinvent perhaps an institution. And the instruments mentioned here in the BISP context here, in the last column, provide the opportunities for BISP to reinvent by looking at some of the options that may be. And there are several examples, and I listed here from Bangladesh, where the speed is anticipatory in terms of rainfall and provision of clean drinking water. In this one, it is how best to integrate with the first two being social protection or supporting climate-triggered disaster victims. And here, you can have several instruments. Some can be trigger-based, some can be parametric, you know, all of them. But I think I've jumped. But in each case, they'll require integration and a seamless integration. And in some ways, if BISP is reaching its inflection point, and we are setting up baby BISPs in the provinces, it's time to sit on the drawing board and think of their mandates and cooperation. And I was very happy to see a framework, a forum for them to deliberate on such issues, to reinvent themselves in terms of scaling up before disasters and addressing some of those issues. And you'll see in the Pakistani context the many other possibilities that can be part of mandates, or at least we can deliberate and refine such thinking. And again, there are cases that exist. I think this one is about Philippines, where the wind velocity determines that disaster is hitting, and before that the trigger works, and it has worked effectively in 2019. Risk transfer support is a very important area. Our outreach is very limited. The BISP database is very simplistic in the sense that it looks at the income levels only, not the climate vulnerability levels, and not the multiple climate vulnerabilities in same areas they may coincide, such as urban flooding or heat wave or torrential rains or GLOFs. And we don't always reach out to, I think in 2022 floods, only 1% of microfinance people were affected. So it's a challenge how far we can increase our outreach. And then there are examples coming from several areas. In this case, there's one from Africa. Integration, I hope I'm not going back and forth, will require institutional integration also. Pakistan's meteorological department generates very sophisticated data. Their short-term forecast for 4 or 5 days is increasingly reliable. It can build a whole ecosystem of early warning systems and integrate that with other mechanisms that are available to us. think I went back on one slide, but doesn't matter. Let me come back to. Some of the work hangs up in the air. If I'm not mistaken, and please allow me, there is someone on this panel from NDMA. They are multi-hazard vulnerability assessments. Some provinces also have those, Sindh and Punjab in particular. And they are like my cousins, not on talking terms. Their methodologies, their relevance, and their effectiveness and implication, they have never been tested. So there are several challenges in terms of strengthening the social protection ecosystem, and this is only one example, and there may be many more in our society, and each one of will be able to add to such examples. But what is important is early warning systems are a precursor. It essentially means that if the social protection system is based on the economic per capita or per family income, the forecast-based system is based on climate science and modeling. We will need to very quickly determine what will be the level of vulnerability with increasing precipitation and temperatures. With 1.5 degrees, we are at this stage, and it's expected to grow. By the turn of this century, it may be much higher than we can even fathom. But the question is, the moment we think of anticipatory system, we are thinking of science and modeling and a different kind of institutional collaborations within the country. I'm sorry, I keep going back. My apologies. And I think this is my last one. There can be several financial instruments, and there can be several success factors for those instruments. And we know instruments that can be tested. Now, to many of you, it will sound like very poetic and futuristic, but we have seen that the institutions do have flexibilities. I was very happy yesterday, I think the representative from Punjab, how much space officer can have to initiate new things, and this is the right time. And therefore, if WAPDA can do green bonds, so can anticipatory allocation. If ADB can give 500 million for drawdown, maybe that can be used in equity for loss and damage fund. Maybe we can create just provincial level baby funds and give them a little bit of autonomy. But one thing is absolutely clear talking about loss and damage fund in my mind. It's not operational yet, as many of you know. And the menu card is very long, that what will be the focus and what will not be included in the mandate. One thing is clear to me, it's my personal reflection, no matter what the design is, but if you have an equity and you go to any financial window, be it loss and damage fund or GCF or adaptation fund or SIF or GIZ or FCDO, take your equity, and equity will mean that climate finance is not hardcore defined finance, because in real life, all development finance has become climate finance. And in many ways, in bilateral context or international climate finance context, it's very, very political. And it's very economic, and driven by economic consideration. So therefore, if you have an equity and good ideas, the chances are that loss and damage and other such funds can be accessed. And that's where I want to wrap up. Personally, I could be wrong, and I hope I am. I think we are in the first box that we see on the load side of ambition and load side of the competence. You go to any policymaker, if you're a donor, they'll always tell you that we are interested in grants, which are small scale, unpredictable, and that's not very good partnership. Or because we are we have limited fiscal space, we'll say we have a preference for concessional loans or budgetary support. Our equity, our capacity will hinge on our capacity to generate domestic taxes and revenue, climate-proof our subsidies, which run into billions. And there was a reference yesterday, and Sobia, in briefing me or guiding me what I'm supposed to say and not say, mentioned that I should refer to National Climate Finance Strategy. I put in there also. And Climate Finance Strategy highlights similar kind of things. And if we are able to work on the higher capacity side, our ambition can grow to the upper quarter that you see here, and that becomes very lucrative for any financing windows, particularly for loss and damage. Why I'm saying particularly loss and damage? Because it's a relatively boutique shop, very small financing. I think it's smaller than ADB's portfolio in Pakistan, if I'm not mistaken. Annual portfolio, and here we are talking different funds. But it has a potential to grow. It will grow. If we can go there with some equity, the chances are we'll have our share of the total resources. So I want to thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen.
Thank you very much, Ali, for that presentation. My apologies to the audience if this was not visible, but just like to remind you that all of the conference's resources are available online, and please do access Ali's presentation. Download it, keep it for future reference, because indeed that was very valuable. Ali, in a short span, felt like a very short span of time, you've given us a rundown of all of the different forms of instruments that are available. You took us from instruments at the supra-regional and regional level in terms of the Caribbean Catastrophe Insurance Facility. You've shown us examples of risk transfer instruments at the national level, and then also at the micro level in terms of going directly to the individual itself. You said that this is an opportunity for BISP to reinvent itself, and now that we have a captive audience in this room, we have colleagues from the provinces who are at different stages of elaborating their strategies. Using the keywords integration, institutional strengthening, reinventing, what would be, in your view, the three main takeaways that provinces can take now and consider as they go into their strategy making process? Thank you.
You couldn't ask a simpler question, right?
No.
It's a difficult question to answer. And 3 points that I have. Islamabad has a habit of not meaning or not implementing the true meaning of the 18th Amendment. So if it is a provincial domain, we need to give provinces a fair chance. We cannot tie their hands that the guidelines and the standards will come from the federal government that is preoccupied with other things and slows down the process. So therefore, that's one. Number two, instead of having baby, what do you call, BISPs, a replica cookie cutter that everyone look alike, I think they need a little bit of support and hand-holding and brainstorming learning sessions such as this to develop their respective areas of specializations. And each one can focus and concentrate on that rather than spreading themselves too thin. Second, in terms of financing, depending too much on, and this third point, too much on the government to write annual checks. I think they need to reinvent themselves in terms of their financing. Just to give you one example, Nadra, we talked about it only yesterday, was in red. It put a price tag on its renewal of its cards. and a nominal one for Pakistani nationals, very high for dual citizenship, citizens and others. And now it's a profitable organization. BISP has an instrument called its database, developed with subsidy. It can charge for the services. Anybody who wishes to use their services to disperse money for anything, like a credit card, there can be a charge. And that's only one way of thinking, and I'm sure when experts sit down and they can find different ways of creating their funds, their trust funds, forging public-private partnerships, engaging with the private sector as co-investors, looking at on such ideas to approach international climate finance windows, including forging partnership with some bilaterals such as GIZ and FCTO and others. Thank you.
Thank you very much. This is a very good segue to the, let me call it the graph of opportunity that you showed us with the y-axis and the x-axis and the plotting of different instruments and also opportunities, which takes me actually to Kamal. Kamal, you've been working very, very intensively with the NDMA. So I would like to ask you, what innovative insurance and risk financing tools, you've seen the graph, you've seen this plotting, what can Pakistan use, what can it adapt, what is realistic? How do we protect our vulnerable communities while at the same time enhancing, let's say, public-private collaboration? Because Ali now also hinted that there's an opportunity to diversify or increase revenue generation opportunities. So what is your view on that?
Well, thank you so much, Ms. Becker. And it was a lovely presentation, Mr. Ali. Very, very thoughtful, very insightful. To quickly comment on what is the landscape, what is available on the shelf in the capital market, and we have to understand our own understanding, how we understand what's available in the market. So when we talk about climate finance, risk finance, we simply, most part of us, we simply mean it's insurance. Insurance is just one instrument in the entire financial landscape, in the array, what is available in the shelf in the capital market. And you must have seen that the departments of finance is usually staying and shying away from such instruments because of the understanding that it's only insurance that we have to afford. It is not the case. We have a long list of instruments that Mr. Ali just displayed. And before going to that, we also have to see how much money we've been seeing stats from the Benazir Income Support Program yesterday. But I also crunched some numbers on the financial tracking system last night and earlier this morning. In addition to what we are spending through BISP, in the last 5 years, we have spent in protection, gender-based violence, in child protection, in protection overall, $60 million in the last 5 years cumulatively. Now that is more than our expenditure in most of the development sectors, education, health, transport. And we also have to be wary of the fact that this is mainly ex-post expenditure, which means we did not have the pre-arranged finance that was the point of emphasis in the previous presentation. What's the issue, one may ask? It has a very high opportunity cost. So what do? We have to go to the risk transfer and risk finance capital market, insurance market. Is insurance the only solution available to us? The answer is a very fat, obvious no. But it is still a viable solution. We have a parametric insurance instrument. There was a conference last week in the same hall next to this one. And Mr. Moeen Fuda, if you remember or if you know him, he's a big name in the insurance industry in Pakistan. He told us a story and he started, I'll quickly digress and they'll come back. He started his speech with a story that in 1984, when he was heading the Pakistan Reinsurance Company, a file lands on his desk for crop insurance, 1984. The premium payment at that time quoted by Munich Re in 84 was 2%. The authorities said, no, it's too much. And then his story ended. Then I continued his story and then I added to the participant, fast forward 35 years, we are working on another instrument for $300 million cover for the parametric insurance for sovereign, Pakistan, floods and earthquake. The premium rate now is 6 to 7%, quite high, but it's still quite high, quite reasonable given the impact that we have. The authority is still not interested. again, fast forward a few years, we have 2022 floods, one of the disruptive one in the recent past. The idea or the challenge is not that what we don't know. The idea is we do not want to avail those options that are available. So we know the financial instruments are available, parametric insurance instrument. For instance, we have indemnity-based instrument. The discussion that we have quickly had over dinner last night. It's not necessarily that we are after sovereign risk finance. Let's start with, and this is something UNDP might want to add later. There is some effort going on public asset infrastructure insurance. NDMA is also working on that. Now, your question was as what other options? Mr. Ali talked about Ethiopian model. I love the Ethiopian model, the PSNP, the Productive Safety Network program. And this is, we did a study for my former employer. It was an internal study, but we took basically the productive side of investments. We are spending $60 million here on protection. We are spending more than $1 trillion on humanitarian, but all the expenditure we are doing has no component of productivity to itself. So it's just basically compensations without adding that revenue generation Mr. Ali talked about. So unless we change that habit, or unless we take a step back and zoom out and find out what's the actual issue. The money is flowing in, but it's not causing the change that we need. So we have to add that productive safety network program, the Ethiopian feature, to our Benazir income support program, the BISP. So for example, if we are having a compensation through BISP, should it be simply a cash transfer? I think it has to improve and graduate to the next level, where it contributes to revenue generation, it contributes to employment opportunity generation. It is easier said than it's done, but we have to start with the first step, and 1,000 miles journey starts with the first step. Now, so that's one avenue that we need to target, particularly when we talk about social safety net. We have to add that productive element in our Benazir income support program. Secondly, the impact bonds, Mr. Ali talked about it. At NDMA, we are tirelessly working on the exploration of a catastrophe bond. But again, the point is, if one agency or one institution is working on one instrument, it does not mean that the others stop working. We have to have this work continued in a joint collaborative manner. So for instance, if we could have thematic bonds, and we have many good examples. We have one very good example from India, where they issued a bond for educating girls. Why can we not, and there are good examples for social safety net bond, why can we not issue a bond, a thematic bond? We have gender bonds, we have resilience bond, we have blue bonds, green bond, this bond, and that bond. Why can we not have a social protection bond that could be issued ideally from the Benazir Income Support Program's platform, but if they think that it's not their ball game, maybe other agencies could help and come in to issue such a bond that will actually, and if we just take the proceeds and do compensation, it's all in vain. That entire effort is useless. We have to add to the bond proceeds the productive element, because these proceeds have to be returned along with the profit. Lastly, you talked about the private sector. Now, there was some discussion in the very end of yesterday's discussion about private sector contribution and role. And I think I want to be very diplomatically and politically correct, but I think we have some understanding constraints how we could engage private sector. So for instance, if we say we are going to rely on corporate social responsibility, I mean, that's just a lame argument. The CSR has been there since forever. So saying CSR as the only way out, or having imposed more taxes or budgetary allocation, I don't buy that. We have to have, particularly for thematic bonds. Thematic bonds is the only answer, only sustainable answer when we talk about, and then there was one argument yesterday from the KP colleagues, and I was having a conversation just before the session with the delegation from KP, that the sustainability angle is very important. If we simply incorporate it in our budgeting process, that doesn't mean it's sustainable. That simply means a liability has been regularized. How do we make it sustainable? We mobilize the domestic private finance, and this is something I've been hammering quite a lot for the last, I don't know how many years, but domestic private finance is really, really important to the development sector. And linking it with overall climate finance ambit, it's really, really important again. And just to give you the perspective, the domestic private finance in Pakistan is only 4%, whereas in India, that contribution is 51%. So this enormous difference is, of course, we are not fully capable or not fully materializing the potential, but we also have some other issues that won't be the agenda of today's topic. So what NDMA is doing? So we are working, we are working and we do stress testing of different exercises. We call it SIMEX, simulation exercise. And as we speak, there's one happening right now. And we've done in the past simulation exercises with the industrial counterparts. We have worked and we've tried to stress test their supply chains. So we've given them this idea that the net zero and the entire discussion, we have to have that thing in. I'm sure I'm out of my time, so I'll stop here.
We'd love to hear more, but we do have time exigencies. So, but what a fascinating disruption playbook that you've given us. So again, the idea that the BISP needs to be more entrepreneurial in its approach, but also in terms of exploring the different options. And here, international development partners, as well as the vehicles that have been established, have a role, a very significant role to play in establishing markets and platforms for action. And with that, I'd like to go to Sana, because Sana has been leading the efforts on, with regards to the Global Shield in Pakistan. Of course, I'd like to underscore here that Germany is the single largest donor to the Global Shield, and the UNDP serves as the secretariat. So, Sana, how can Pakistan leverage these international mechanisms? How can we ensure that the quality of the requests that Pakistan will now put into the Global Shield for financing, how can they take care of some of the aspects that Ali and Kamal have raised? Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sobhya, and thank you so much, colleagues. A very interesting presentation, and what I've been hearing is the pre-arranged financing, financial protection. And for that, like Global Shield, I don't know how many of you are aware of the initiative, but let me briefly talk about Global Shield first. It's basically a joint initiative launched at COP27 by G7 and V20 finance ministries. The process is a very systematic one, a coherent one, and a sustainable one, where the countries run the process on demand-driven basis. And the government takes the charge. And here I'm talking about the Ministry of Climate Change, who took the lead role and identified like UNDP as an in-country support structure. The Global Shield, people think that it's the funds are fully available, but the thing is that these funds could be made available to the country once the system and the total demand-driven approach is adopted. For that process, we conducted an in-country process and conducted all consultations around the country, consulted about more than 300 stakeholders around the country, and we identified the priority areas, the areas which need the support of the, which need the support in terms of identifying policies around them and also develop instruments around them. So what are those areas which needs the coherent approach and the systematic approach that can lead the country to access the funds which are available under Global Shield? So those are the areas, for example, are the sovereign risk financing, the public assets, which needs protection, the pre-arranged financing, so that the vulnerable community, when the disaster hits, they can actually, the funds can be made available to them. Another area is the agriculture. Kamal rightly mentioned about the crop insurance. And to tell you honestly, crop insurance is again the part of the request for support which has been submitted by the Ministry of Climate Change. And we're still talking about it, and we still do not have the, the tried and tested approach which is available for the farmers and the vulnerable community who are at risk from different perils around the climate change. So another area which is identified as part of the Global Shield was the livelihoods, the social protection part. Of course, the instruments are there, but again, how can we link them to the climate and disaster risk financing so that the funds are available to the vulnerable communities at risk. So this is one very important part, and this can be done through the adaptive social protection. We have been listening about it since yesterday, and there are many approaches which can be linked to it. And lastly, the risk analytic part, which is very important and which needs to be integrated so that the data which is present right now in fragmented forms can be used in a manner that can actually inform the solution development, the insurance mechanisms to be developed, and of course many other instruments and tools that are part of the climate and disaster risk finance and insurance approach that can be developed. So this is very important part which needs to be taken care of, because like many provinces are working on the on different data sets, different kind of assessments, but how they are integrated, that's very much important right now, because the donors or the funds which are available internationally are looking at a coherent approach, a systematic approach, the data which actually is authentic and not not tempered is available to them to define certain instruments and policies for the country and address the vulnerable community at risk. So yeah, so I just finished here, yeah.
Thank you, Sana. You highlighted the importance of having locked-in resources in place that can be drawn down. You have spoken about the importance of having robust data that we can use. And you've also spoken about best practices. And with that, I'd like to go to Ermina and ask Ermina, given the EU's experience in promoting social inclusion in very diverse settings and contexts, what best practices can Pakistan draw on? Thank you.
Thank you very much, and thank you for inviting me to this wonderful meeting. And I wish I could be there in person in this beautiful room. And I will, to answer your question, I think what we have been doing at the EU more and more is look at these risk pooling instruments that are available, right? So, for example, the Caribbean Catastrophe Risk Insurance Facility, the CRIF, which I heard mentioned before, which the EU is supporting together with the World Bank, France, Ireland, and others. So this is a parametric insurance instrument against natural hazards. And we have the example from the Grenada, Hurricane Beryl in Grenada, where payouts were made, and about 10% of these payouts were made to social protection. So this is a very concrete example of how social protection systems can be used directly through these distribute payouts in times of a disaster. Of course, the rest of the funds were going to electricity, water companies, etc., right? But the importance of the social protection system was very much highlighted there. Another example is from the Africa Risk Capacity, another risk pooling mechanism, which is supported by the EU, among others. And then we saw during the El Nino, Zambia, Mozambique, Zimbabwe, and Malawi received support to respond to the severe droughts there. So these regional risk pooling instruments, I think, are very important to also consider in these cases. And then I'll go back to also the core of the support that the EU has been providing on social protection. And here it is really about expanding coverage, ideally in a life cycle, following a life cycle approach, so that it's not focused on a static group, but it's more dynamic, and it looks at life cycle vulnerabilities. And having this kind of systems in place allows whatever insurance instrument is there, whatever wherever the funds are coming from, it gets distributed to people who are actually affected. So high coverage, it doesn't mean expensive. It means coverage for those who need it when they need it, right? Not everybody has to be receiving social protection funds all the time, but being eligible to receive payment and being in a system, in a digital registry, for example, is very important. So this has been the core of the EU support in partner countries. We've been working a lot also with a previous program that ended, unfortunately, but it focused a lot on public finance management. And this is about setting also the structures in place so that when there is a need, everyone is ready to access funding easily and transparently also to distribute it to the affected regions. So public finance management principles are very, very important as well. And I want to come to the last very quick point on the issue of productivity that I think Kamal mentioned earlier. It is true that having some kind of productive link to a social protection program is always important, right? Because it is it may help a family or a household transition out of poverty. However, I want to say that social protection on its own has a value, and it is an investment, right? And it goes back, the funding that goes into these households, the payments that are made, go back to the economy. And we had a study done for Pakistan, as well as other countries, but for Pakistan, we found that there is a multiplier effect of social protection to the range of between 1.5 to 7.2. So for 1 unit of increase in social protection, you can have, depending on what type of social protection you invest in, you can have between 1.5 to 7.2 extra output, right, within 12 quarters or 3 years of the initial, let's say, shock, meaning shock, positive shock, increasing social protection. So that is because of the multiplier effect of social protection, and these are values specifically for Pakistan. So just to say that, yes, linking to jobs is obviously very important. It can be done through the private market as well. It doesn't have to be done through a program. The cash transfers themselves have value because they increase productivity. They help households deal with, obviously, cases of impacts of disasters, but also access to education, access to health, access to adequate nutrition. We cannot forget about these issues. So I'll stop here for now.
Thank you so much, Irmina. Very useful to learn about all of these experiences, and I'm sure there are takeaways here for our colleagues. I'm going to zoom back to Pakistan. Mansoor, you're, I think, best placed to answer this given the range of actions that the ADB has in place right now. From your perspective, what are the biggest potential barriers as well as opportunities that Pakistan can unlock to better manage disaster risk finance and the different instruments in this country?
Thank you, Sobia, and thank you all the panelists for wonderful presentations. And what I'm going to speak about, I think it will feed into what Dr. Ali has already said. So in my view, I think the scaling up insurance instruments in Pakistan face a number of potential barriers, and these include both the demand side and the supply side barriers. On the demand side, there is no awareness, basically, among the poorest of the poorest population, and mainly the farmers and people living in the rural areas, who either consider the insurance un-Islamic or unnecessary for them, number one. Number two, even if they do access some insurance, they do not have the capacity, the financial capacity to pay back the premiums, and unless financial subsidy is provided to them, they won't be able to do anything about this. And number three, there's a general lack of awareness in Pakistan as well, not just in the rural areas, but also in the urban population as well. I mean, I was reading a UNDP report which says that only 1.8% of the GDP is linked to, less than GDP, less than 1% of the GDP is spent on the insurance. On the supply side, there are issues with regard to the limited risk assessment data. There are no robust climatic data sets available which can be used by the insurance agencies to do this insurance as well. Number two are the weak regulatory environment in the country as well. The Insurance Ordinance 2000 is, outdated, and the Security Exchange Commission of Pakistan is trying to update it. They have a draft legislation, I think, in the 2020, but it has not been passed by the parliament yet. And number three is the infrastructure presence of the insurance companies and across the length and breadth of the country as well. So I mean, with these barriers, it is really difficult to introduce any kind of insurance. However, things are changing. As Sana has already mentioned, the Global Shield is already coming up as a potential instrument, financing instrument. The World Bank and ADB are also working on the agriculture side, especially on the crop insurance as well. But most importantly, the premium instruments that we are coming up are in the World Bank, there is a catastrophe drawdown option, which enables the Ministry of Finance to have access to funds. And the similar is the catastrophe disaster fund, that climate disaster fund that we are coming up with. So we have developed a program called the Climate Disaster Resilience Enhancement Program. And we are adopting a programmatic approach. It's a $1 billion program. Half of it is budgetary support, and that budgetary support is provided to the government on meeting prior conditions. And those prior conditions also include social protection prior conditions. For example, in our sub-program one, which we disbursed in November last year, the policy action for the BISP was to increase its presence at the Union Council level. BISP is currently at the tehsil level. So more they're closer to the population, the more they'll be able to respond to that. In the sub-program 2, we are now in talks with BISP to take it further. Number one, Dr. Ali talked about not linking the social protection data with the climate data. So we have developed a national catastrophe model. And in the national catastrophe model that we have developed in the NDRMF, we would like the BISP to link its data to the NatCat model, and that would provide the infrastructure, that would provide the risk assessment data needed for the insurance company so that they can assess the risk, they can finance the risk, they can do the risk modeling, and on the basis of which insurance can be provided. And number 3, we are working with the BISP to encourage them to do risk insurance for the poorest of the poor. Instead of paying cash transfers post-disaster, for example, it happened in COVID, it happened in the 2022 floods, we are trying to work with BISP to develop a mechanism where instead of paying cash transfer, they pay a premium for the poor. And the premium can be paid, a small amount from the cash transfer can be allocated to the premium, which can be paid in advance. And once the disaster strikes, that money is already available to the BISP through the insurance companies, which they can give to the poor as well. So I stop here, and I think if you have further questions, I'll be happy to answer.
That was brilliant, and that reminds me of some empirical evidence that we gathered in Jamaica, which was that the Jamaican government gave $300 in insurance premium subsidies to vulnerable communities, and this offset damages to the extent of $30,000. So this is a direct connection that we've seen. We have a lot more questions, but I'm looking to Jost to... We have 5 minutes, extremely generous. Thank you so much, because we have a lot more that we want to cover right now. I'm going to ask my panelists to please keep it short. I would encourage the participants to please engage the participants, the panelists, wherever you see them during coffee breaks and so, because these people are a wealth of information. Coming back to the national level, and talking about the National Climate Finance Strategy. One of the areas or opportunities for improvement in the National Climate Finance Strategy is including giving the private sector more of a role, driving in sustainable finance, etc. So, Ali, where do you think are avenues or conduits for increasing the type of private sector collaboration that Kamal alluded to in his remarks?
Well, Kamal has already given a very sophisticated perspective. I just want to keep at a very macro level. State has the habit of elbowing out private sector. We see that in insurance sector also. It's not really that people are against insurance or it's not Islamic and its perception or awareness is not there. It's just that the governance is such that it's dominated by the security paradigm and we are not allowing the private sector insurance industry to flourish. with less than 1% score, we cannot go very far. In Hindustan, if I'm not mistaken, there was a legislation about 10 years ago that every insurance company should offer its portfolio minimum 25% to the lowest quartile of the population. So 25% is for the poor. Typically, insurance agencies will not have that much staff, but you're changing the DNA to reach out to the poor. Now, another way to look at this, almost all development sectors of Pakistan are covered in NDC, and yet we do not see the private sector investing in any of those sectors. And all of those sectors can benefit from new instruments such as the ones that we mentioned here, including insurance. So private sector need to be given chance. Now, when I say private sector, it's not recipe for all the solutions. It's just that the government will have to define its role as a regulator and not as a service provider, and you allow others to come into that. Last piece of question, because the time is extremely short for us. Private sector does not necessarily mean big business also. The most vulnerable and the most threatened by climate disasters and climate trends are small and medium enterprises. We also need to think about them. And Pakistan's economy's backbone comes from them. And they are mostly service providers to larger businesses also. And with the nominal skill set that we have and nominal finances that they have and instruments they have to give them protection, they also need an umbrella of insurance that helps them protect against them and their assets from climate disasters.
Thank you very much. And this is something also where we encourage the provinces to also look at the National Climate Finance Strategy and then see what opportunities you have there. Kamal, in 60 seconds, how do we connect the dots between the National Climate Finance Strategy and the Disaster Risk Finance Strategy?
Well, thank you. I mean, that's a little unfair for 60 seconds, but I mean, you've written an article, The Policy Games We Love to Play, and I read your article 2 days back that you wrote on the ambitions that we have. Our main challenge is our policies, and rightly analyzed, they are not interoperable. They speak different universes, and the reason behind that is we have these huge walls. We work in silos. So when we're working on risk financing strategy, I don't want to see the faces of people working in climate change. When I'm working on climate change policy, I don't want to see you guys stay out of this room. That is our main problem. So we have to make sure that they are, how do we do it? We have to sit together. We have to, when there is discussion, we sit together. I'll give you an example. When this climate finance strategy was being developed, I doubt it, and DMA was not part of it. So that kind of attitude has to be, if we really want to achieve that resilient development, that has to be changed, and it has to be the other way around, I think. Yeah.
Thank you. Sorry for being unfair, but life is unfair. Mansoor, in 1 minute, and I'm sorry for that, but how do we incorporate, how do we make our strategy more innovative in terms of, for example, how do we incorporate carbon market mechanisms into disaster risk financing? How do we increase public-private partnerships or other forms of collaboration? And what role possibly could the NDMA play in that regard?
Oh, that's a tough one. Okay. So I think the greatest opportunity we have is the approval of the National Carbon Policy and the guidelines that the Ministry of Climate Change has recently approved. And this policy talks about the decarbonization of the economy and raising revenue through carbon credits. And there are huge opportunities available because it also promotes projects that reduce greenhouse gas emissions. So what ADB has started doing, and we are starting with a pilot that we have started doing a study on the decarbonization of health sector in Pakistan. And this study, we are using the already available data in the National Health Expenditure Survey. And now we are going towards the provinces to collect real-time data of the health facilities, especially the public health facilities available. And once that data is available, we'll be working individually with the provinces through a pilot project on creating greenhouse gas decarbonization frameworks of the provinces. And going forward, a lot of investments are coming in health and education. So for example, in the health sector, we are processing 2 projects, one in Sindh and one in Punjab, on nursing education, and we are trying to build centers of excellence and revamping the infrastructure there. So we intend to make these infrastructure climate resilient. And through the climate resilient infrastructures, we would like to invite we would like to invite the governments, and we would like to propose to the governments to use the carbon credits from them for self-sustenance of these facilities. Because once the investment is made, once the infrastructure is gone, we see usually the maintenance is not there. So we would like to encourage the government to use the carbon credits to sustain these facilities. I stop here.
Thank you so much for making that connection between the importance of reducing carbon footprints and not having projects that have a lot of greenhouse gas emissions, and the direct link with climate vulnerability. 30 seconds.
Since we mentioned National Climate Finance Strategy, I also want to mention National Taxonomy released by the World Bank. It's on their website for public comments. And it copies European and Chinese model and presents a hybrid to attract private sector investment. Very interestingly, it does not mention insurance sector.
We'll make a note of that. Sana, you know your time budget, but what policy reforms are needed to improve the financial architecture for adaptive social protection, especially in terms of utilizing risk transfer instruments?
Thank you so much, Sobhya. I'll be very quick, just pointing out some policy reforms and what UNDP is also supporting globally as well. I think the data platforms, the fragmentation of data, it needs to be taken away. So we need to have something related to digitalization. So the same intervention we are trying to do with the Securities and Exchange Commission of Pakistan to digitalize the insurance sector. And I think a similar kind of intervention can be done for the data related to social protection, and that can also be integrated on the data sets which SECP is going to work on. I think this is one thing which can address the fragmentation issues and also other issues related to frauds, and because it's insurance, right? So the payouts had to go out to the right people. And there are some insurance companies who are working on different non-life related assets. So another thing which is very important for Pakistan to consider for the reforms is the public asset registry. This is very important, and I think that part, when addressed, can actually lead to another requirement, which is development of assets and loss register, which is also very important for any kind of policy reforms that need to be in place for any kind of initiative that is addressing the or loss or damage fund. And similarly, for the adaptive social protection and social protection itself, there's a links to be established with the cash transfers through pre-arranged financing. It's a core to it. So how we are going to link the disaster and risk financing to social protection, and which channels can be, established, distribution channels especially, and which mechanisms need to be in place. Similarly, the DRR policies and the frameworks, again, I'll talk about their capability and their capacity to manage the climate-related risks. That need to be incorporated as well in order to address this in a proactive manner. And of course, which Ali Saab also mentioned about the forecast-based systems, I think that also need to be put in place for an effective implementation of these policies. Thank you.
Thank you, Sana. That's very valuable. In strengthened institutions, institutional arrangements, transparency, good governance, robust data, digital registries, all important ingredients. Which brings me to Ermina, because you already touched on the importance of digital registries. Ermina, what are you most optimistic about when it comes to the cooperation amongst development partners in this country to integrate different risk transfer instruments within the context here?
Thank you. And I will pick up very quickly on what Sana just said also, and what you just asked me about interoperability and coordination. I think the EU is investing a lot in Pakistan We have 2 programs, one run, financed by the delegation directly in the Sindh province with GIZ and other partners, for horizontal interoperability of systems between social protection, DRR, climate change, and vertical with the National Socioeconomic Registry. So this is one, I think it's a great initiative that has a lot of potential that other provinces can learn from as well. And also with the Digital Convergence Initiative, which I think you will hear about in the next session. There's another program that looks more about linking contributory and non-contributory systems, making sure that this interoperability exists, and that will be managed by the ILO. So we're very much looking forward to the findings of these 2 important programs. Globally, the Global Shield, obviously, we're very proud to be contributing to that, and the Loss and Damage Fund as well. So we're really looking forward to Pakistan having access also to the knowledge there. And then lastly, because also within Europe, we don't have as great coverage for natural disasters as one might think. I mean, countries in the south and Bulgaria, Romania, etc., including my country, Greece, less than 5% of losses from natural disasters are insured. So there is a long way to go, right? So we have to be patient and also tap on the contributory capacity also of even the informal sector. So we cannot rule this out. I know in Pakistan, like in other countries, there's very high level of informality, but there's important contributory capacity, and there are innovative ways to tap on that. So I would also bring that on the table, especially when it comes to insurance. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I think I would be doing everyone an injustice by trying to summarize everything very, very quickly. But suffice it to say that what we definitely need is a systems thinking approach to manage this very complex, interconnected, interdependent system that we have. Ladies and gentlemen, you've been a fantastic audience. I had the pleasure of a fantastic panel here with me. And I would like to thank you for your attention and you for your valuable contributions. And with that, I hand back to Joost. Thank you.
So please give a hand to our panelists and our moderator. And a special shout out to Amina. I think it's, 6 o'clock for you? Yes, thank you so much for getting up probably at 5 o'clock. So please give a special thank you to Amina for joining us.